Coogs House. All right. You might have noticed several other schools tweeting out things about recruits committing to the university this month, and not so many for Houston.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can listen to the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again. Remember, doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers, so hit subscribe. Hit like the video so we know you entered, and comment down below to let us know that you want in the contest. If after talking about recruiting today, you're like, I don't know what to say. This seems a bit. What am I going to do? Tell us if you are a person that prefers a quarter zip or a hoodie. I tend to go back and forth, but obviously the last several years of my life have been hoodie life. All right, so. Again, it is recruit season. June is a crazy important month for recruiting as far as taking visits and tours and camps and meeting kids and shaking hands and kissing babies and doing all those wonderful things. But Houston's in a weird spot. They currently only have one one committed kid for the 2024 class, and a lot of their Big 12 counterparts have a lot more. So we brought on Brian Smith to help us break that all down. Let's welcome in Brian. 1 second. And we are joined by recruiting analyst Brian Smith to help us break down the 2024 class and what kind of things they need. But first, Brian, how you doing today?
Doing well, sir. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I'd be really good if some of these big 280-pound kids would commit or something like that. Houston's current 2024 class, at the time of this recording, has one commit. Now, as Brian, I think, will allude to, the goal is to sign kids in December, not necessarily in June, but that's where we're at. Brian, before we get into more specific stuff, Houston moves into the Big 12 for all intents and purposes. That is into the big leagues. What does a school like Houston have to do to get Big 12 caliber recruits? We know that's a different kind of athlete.
Number one, you got to show the product on the field this fall. Some of the kids, I think, are going to take a wait-and-see approach. I mean, Dana's done such a good job with offenses for a while. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. But I think they also need to continue to play at a high level on defense. Even though they've lost some guys over the last couple of years that were pretty good, they need to have an exciting brand against Big 12 teams. If they can start this fall, like September to early October, and play well against teams like Oklahoma or Texas A&M is somebody that kind of did that back in their day before they went to the SEC. You make your bones there, you got to prove it. You know, these Texas kids, especially like Houston, Austin, Dallas, they're not just going to go there because you're University of Houston. They want to see you do something. So I think part of it's going to be on the fall, but at the same time, they've only got one commitment. That worries me. We're a little bit in flux on like what's going on here.
So and again, feel free to talk about have you seen this play out at other schools? Because Houston's not the first school to move from a group of five to a power five, or the only school to ever have one commitment in a 2024 class this late in the process. What kind of red flags or bat signals are you seeing out when you see those kind of statistics?
It's not a good trend, obviously. I mean, you can't have one commitment going into the 1st of June and think things are going, quote unquote, well. But again, this is so unique because the kids are waiting to see, can they really compete at a higher level in the Big 12? There's no way to answer it until they play. So they have to recruit every kid, especially the greater Houston, say 30-mile radius of Houston, Galveston, etc. They've got to recruit every kid like they're not committed. Doesn't matter if Georgia's offering them, doesn't matter if USC's offering them, Texas, Oklahoma. They've got to go over and get some of these local kids. That's the number one priority. Houston has forever been a great city for prep football. And Houston just hasn't capitalized. Whether it's resources, the wrong head coach, I don't know what it is. But Holgorsen's not exactly known as a top-notch recruiter. So they got to figure out something on their staff. They got to do something different in the meantime, because September is going to be a little while. You can't just wait there. You got to have some momentum through this month. All the kids are taking visits in June. How does Houston handle that and maximize, keyword maximize, the time now between this little spurt of recruiting and then the season when kids can see what they can do? So I'm as curious as you and probably every Cougars fan, because this is a school that could be a sleeping giant. They could be a national power, but they never keep the kids home. LSU, Texas, Alabama, Notre Dame just got Logan Thomas. He's a kid from the Houston area. They never stay home. So they got to figure that out.
Well, and you mentioned other schools and programs coming in and pilfering, maybe too negative a word, but coming through Houston and taking kids away, right? Houston's going to have to combat that. And I'm a guy that is probably the most neutral on Dana because I think there's things he does really well and things he does really poorly. If Dana's not going to be the recruiter that gets the city done, and he does other things well enough to keep his job, say, where else does it pick up? Does it come from a coordinator or what else has to happen?
Let me give you an exact example. There's a guy, I live in Florida. There's a guy for Penn State. He's from the Fort Lauderdale area. Jawan Sider, I believe is his name. He's as good a recruiter as there is in the country. He's not a head coach. He's not somebody that is the offensive coordinator that's a famous guy like a Norm Chow was under Pete Carroll at USC or whatever, but kids relate to him. It's about relationships. You've got to have a guy that when he goes out and recruits, the high school coaches know him, the kids respect him, the parents like having him around. It's the whole gamut. And unless you have one of those guys, and you really need two or three, maybe not, Sider might be the best recruiter in the country, but I'm just using him as an example. If you don't have a couple of those guys on your staff, you're not going to do well at the Power 5 level. You will get steamrolled in recruiting. Does Houston have one of those guys? If they don't, they're going to be a 500 team at best in the Big 12, and then probably not even that. It's bottom line in today's society of recruiting. You look at the very top, even Kirby, he won't hire a guy unless he can recruit.
All fair. I got to ask, because you mentioned you got Florida connections. You mentioned like George right there. That's prime. I mean, if Houston is prime, that's the other side. Like there are multiple places. Any of these five could be the best in the country in a given year, right? I got to ask, what would the timeline look like for being like, look, Dana was a great American Athletic Conference guy, but we have to have someone to recruit the area at Big 12 level. It's year one in 2023. How long, because modern recruiting feels sped up, right? You've got transfers, you've got kids committing super early. What do you think the timeline of that would look like? And when do we need to start like telling Dana it's time to put up or shut up?
Next spring. You'll get through this class. They'll have a season under their belt. And then they can tell kids, okay, this is what we've done. This is what we're doing. You would have at least some data to sell to recruits. Right now, it's not his fault that they haven't played Power 5 football yet. And that's what kids are going to ask. Well, I can't tell you. We haven't, you know what I mean? It's just the conundrum. There's nothing that anybody at the University of Houston can do about that. Good, bad, or draw this fall, it's still a data point. And they can show kids, okay, at this spot, where we are a ways off. Let's be realistic. These are, private behind it. That's how this stuff works. I've talked to 50 coaches about this. And then you tell the kid, hey, you can come in and play. I wish you couldn't, but we are struggling at position X, whatever, D-line or offensive tackle, whatever it is. That's one thing you do. And then the other is you can point to what's he done well? Passing game. There is no freaking excuse for them not to be in on receivers and quarterbacks. Nationally, you're going to be in the Power 5 and you're in a metropolitan area like Houston, it should not be that hard to sell. I'm sorry. Even if Houston wasn't as good as it was with prep kids, they should be able to get a kid from Cincinnati if they wanted him, if he's a quarterback. Holgorsen could freaking coach quarterback. I mean, it's not debatable. That's the one thing that you need to see, a little trend there. And then finally, like, what is the effort with getting some commitments early next spring? The 25 class is loaded nationally. Loaded. It's far better than 24. If they don't have more commitments than what they have right now, which is one, that's still mind-blowing to me. But if they don't have more commitments than that, we have a problem. They can't be at one at this point next year. That to me is a flat-out fireable offense at any Power 5 school, because you're not going to win big or even be average committing one kid before June. That's not good enough.
All right, I want to take a pause for a moment to talk to you about bird dogs, because bird dogs are like the most comfortable thing in my closet. You can wear the pants on dates, to work out, to lounge around and make a podcast with, to hang out around the house like sweatpants. They're made of stretchy fabric that look and feel great. I cannot express this enough. Bird dogs are one of my favorite things. And I got a pair on right now. One of my favorite things I've got in my entire home right now, frankly. You can wear the pants absolutely anywhere, shorts anywhere you wear shorts. Again, gym, swimming pool, dates, out to a brew with your buddies, sitting here making a podcast, lounge around the house on a weekend, the ultimate pair of pants. And right now, you can go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and use the promo code lockedoncollege to make sure you get thrown in a Yeti style tumbler. Yes, a Yeti style tumbler, as I've got right here, full that will keep your cold drinks cold and your hot drinks hot. We know how important it is to keep cold drinks cold here in Texas. So make sure you go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and get your Yeti with your bird dogs today. You said we have a problem. Thank you for not going to the cliched Houston, we have a problem.
Fair enough.
I do want to transition a little bit because Houston has targeted and offered a number of kids in class of 2024. They just don't have necessarily a commitment yet, right? And so maybe as June continues to roll, things will change. One of the top-end kids they've got recruited right now, and that is listed Houston in the top 5 on most recruiting outlets and things like that. I guess he hadn't done the deal where he posts his graph or whatever online. But Damani Maxon is a safety at a Clear Lake. He's a 4-star safety, 6 foot, 170, 175 pounds, depending on the outlet. Frankie Arthur is a 2024 running back. He's got Houston fairly highly. What do you know about these skill position guys? Are these the kind of guys that get Houston Big 12 ready? Because I would be like, Houston's occasionally had the receiver or the quarterback, whatever. But is this kind of what we're looking at?
This is the kind of situation that really segues in from the last. If you're going to make a move and elevate your program to the Big 12, the Power 5, you're not going to do it unless you can get some of the top guys in Texas, especially the guys that live within, say, 2 hours of your campus. Let's just use, I love Frankie Arthur. He's the running back up at Oak Ridge in Conroe, just north of the Houston area. That's the kind of guy that can be a 3-year starter, intern pro. You have to get a few of those kids. And their offense is exciting. I mean, Houston, I get it if a kid wants to play offense for Holgorsen. Right? It's not a real tough sell. He's done it for years. I just don't understand why they're not trending necessarily for some of them in a more broad way. This is one of the kids they could get. He's a slippery running back, has tremendous vision and runs super hard. There's a play on his film where he gets hit like by 4 guys at the line of scrimmage and gets like 20 yards. He's a dude. He can play for Alabama as far as I'm concerned. But the teams that get these kids, they got to prove something on the recruiting trail because he's got other schools calling him too. What are you putting in the effort for? Damani Maxon, that's another kid. Clear Lake's a program that's always got players. Northwest side of Houston, one of suburban schools. That's really important for them to get it. Are they doing well there? They haven't. Why should they change? And it's a defensive player. That's also a trending thing. Can Houston get some defensive guys? Dana's probably going to have an easier time recruiting offensive players because he's an offensive coach. That's fair. But are you going to beat Baylor, who's definitely going to have a good defense under their head coach, and teams like that, Oklahoma State, et cetera, without better defensive talent than what Houston has done? Maybe, but I doubt it. They've maximized. Their coaching staff's done a good job, but you need more talent. If you're going to play Big 12, you're going to have more players. You needed to rotate into games. You're going to have more competitive games. You got to have more depth. So this is another kid you have to get, but they don't lead for any of them. And I'm just truly puzzled by it.
Well, and is that as simple as relationship building, Brian? And be blunt, like I is that all this is that the relationships haven't quite been built yet in the same way that Baylor's got ties to these schools, or even in Maxon's case, Georgia's in his top 3, right? Like
not a good sign. Not a good sign.
Is it just relationships though?
Relationships are the number one thing. I covered UCF until I moved over and covered Miami on Fan Nation. And T. Will, as we called him, he's now at Arkansas as the DC. He talked about it in one of his press conferences. He said recruiting is just relationships. He looked at it like out at the group that we was talking to at a press conference like we were all idiots or something. He's like, somebody asked me, he said, it's just relationships. As long as you build a good relationship with a kid, you got a chance. I'm like, okay. It was just A to B and he was done. That's the kind of thing where I don't know the Houston staff personally. I don't know anybody on their staff. So it's really hard for me to say, but they need somebody like Travis loves recruiting. I guarantee it's one of the reasons Arkansas hired him, because they struggle to get kids to come out to Fayetteville. It's middle of nowhere. I get it. It's the polar opposite of Houston. It is. I mean, it's a small town.
Yeah.
It's a county college, basically. It's not a very big town. They need personalities like that. In Houston's case, being a major metropolitan area, it's right there with Chicago is the third biggest city in the entire United States. It should be just the opposite. How freaking hard is it to build relationships when you're selling all of this? That's what I'm confused about. I would think they would have more guys that excited to go there and coach and be a part of the training. Because like I told you, first time I was on, Houston is a program that can be a national contender if they get the right staff. And when I say staff, I mean the whole conglomerate. That includes strength, that includes nutrition, the whole nine. University is going to have to pony up. There is no shortcut there. It's millions of dollars. But you can do it because the kids are already there. And the relationship building is the final part. That's effort. If again, they've got one commitment. That's not enough. They haven't done their part to this part of the year. They just haven't. They've got to do better, to your point, with relationships.
So we safeties and running backs, the offensive and defensive skill guys, while it'd be nice to be landing the top guys in Houston, obviously, there's the occasional guy that comes through Houston that is one of those guys, whether it's Matthew Golden in the 2022 class, who had a great freshman year, or Tank Dell is a JUCO guy, just went off the NFL, or what have you. On the defense side, Marcus Jones is New England Patriot. List goes on, right? Big guys. 280-pound plus guys, offensive line, defensive line. While the defensive line has had success at the college level, I would say that, putting up good sack numbers and that kind of stuff, moving into the Big 12 requires different kinds of linemen. One of the higher ranked guys that has Houston in the top 5 of their list is a kid named Blake Ivy from Clear Springs, just outside of Houston as well. But he also has the Texases, the A&Ms, the LSUs. What's Houston look? I mean, does Houston have to continue to swing for 4 stars like Blake Ivy here? What does Houston do to compete with those guys like the A&Ms, the LSUs that are looking at the same city?
I think it's very simple. You have to recruit them like you're going to get them. And what I mean by that is you got to believe it yourself. But when you go visit a kid at his school and you're talking to the head coach, it's just you and the head coach in the room. You have to make it obvious that we're going to recruit here every year for your top kids, because the coach relationship with the prep player is very important. They've got to be able to tell them like they're serious, like they're trying to elevate their program. That's one. 2, when you're talking to the kid, you got to be honest and say, we're going into the Big 12. We're not just going to be a doormat. We're trying to win the frickin' conference championship. We want you to be a part of it. You got to be a little cocky, because you're not going to just knock the door down and take over the mantle, even when Texas and Texas A&M leave. Baylor, TCU, and Oklahoma State, these are good programs. Texas Tech, if you screw around, they'll drop 50 on you. These are good programs. You have to have guys. You have to make them believe that you think you can do it, and they're going to be a part of that process. And you got to do it over and over. It's just rinse and repeat at that point. Every kid, our goal is to keep it. Again, let's start with Houston. They're going to recruit East Texas. They're going to recruit all the way up in Dallas. They're going to recruit the entire state, but they're going to do it in a sense that they have to win all these battles as often as they can. And it can't just be basic stuff. It can't just be a little bit, we're going to recruit you. It can't just be one weekend we're really after you. It's every single week that Houston is going after these kids. And finally, it's a situation where if you're going to do it, you got to have a whole staff that believes in that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, and I got to ask a couple questions on that, though. With recruiting Houston big fellas, you're competing with the big guys, obviously. Is the sell going to be stay home? Is the sell going to be Big 12? Obviously, every family is a little different, but what do you see as Houston's biggest sell to a big guy as a school in the city of Houston in the Big 12? Is it location? Is it competition? Is it what are you looking at?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of what you mentioned. I think growing into being a national power, come help us be different. To me, that would be personally appealing if I was a recruit today. I'm not saying that's some kid from Clear Springs High School or whatever. That doesn't have to be for them, but there's got to be something like that you kind of hang your hat on. We're not the tradition-rich Big 12 school because we're not in the Big 12. But we've got the talent. You're right here. Why don't you help build something with us and be a dominant Big 12 school? They finally let us in this league. And the reason they never wanted us in the first place is because of the recruiting. There have always been, and this is my steadfast belief, they don't want the school that's right there in Houston to gobble up the recruits they come down to get. Texas and Oklahoma never wanted Houston to be in the Big 12. I guarantee it. And I get it. So they're just trying to get as many of the kids locally to believe they're a part of the long-term future, and why not us?
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm speaking too quickly, but there's no accident then that the Big 12 let in Houston as they lose Texas and Oklahoma, right? That there's no A&M, Texas, and Oklahoma are already out of the conference, and now Houston's moving in. And so it's not quite the same uphill battle, but it does feel like a little bit of an uphill battle too. That's not an accident either, right?
No, I mean, you're recruiting more against the SEC now. That's not friendly for Houston. There is no shortcut there. Arkansas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, of course, LSU's always made a living in the Houston area. That's just par for the course. That's a never-ending battle. Georgia recruits there, obviously. Florida, Florida got DJ Lagway. He's from Willis. It's right up the road from Houston. That's just part of the process, man. If you want to recruit at the Power 5 level, you got to beat Power 5 schools for the best players.
Well, and hopefully Houston does that on a handful of these guys in the near future. I to say it's I don't guess it's set in stone or anything like that, but it'd be nice to see it happen. Brian, you follow recruiting national. I know you're located in Florida, but you do follow recruiting nationally. You're at Elite 11 stuff. You're at various rivals kinds of things. Where can people find you and your work most frequently?
At FB Scout _Florida for YouTube, for Instagram, and specifically Twitter. I'm on Twitter the most. I'm doing a lot of videos and stuff with prospects on YouTube right now, and it's a lot of fun. That's probably the number one thing I'm trying to build up the most is my YouTube channel. If you want to see prospects from around the country I talk about, I've just gotten into that pretty heavy in the last few weeks, and I'm going to be doing it for the rest of the year. It's kind of my new thing. I just put up their film and talk about them. So it's a blast, man. Come check it out. FB Scout _Florida. That's
FB Scout _Florida. Brian Smith joined the show again, talking recruiting. Thank you so much for stopping by today, Brian.
Take care, buddy. You have a great day.
All right. Thanks again to Brian for stopping by the show today. Good to talk all things Houston recruiting and kind of shedding some light on why things might not be going the best direction at the moment, but that's not necessarily this big doom and gloom thing for the future, right? That's always good to keep in mind. Again, that's Brian at FB Scout _Florida. You can find me on Twitter, talk all things Houston Cougar recruiting at Painsworth512. That's PAINSWORTH512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all of your favorite social media sources, or social media platforms. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. For a second listen, I'm going to recommend going over to Locked On Today. They're keeping up with NBA Finals on a daily basis, getting you ready for all things NBA Finals, Stanley Cup, and so on like that. So make sure to go check out Locked On Today. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Cougs this morning. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.